You'll have that for the rest of your days. Boy, the weekend always goes by fast. What is used to clean the fuel air in the engine? And this is a dumb question, but we got CCZ valve, PCV valve, fuel filter, air filter. Obviously, it's a fuel filter. Okay, fuel pump. Yeah, you're going to get some fuel through there, aren't you? Fuel pumps are either A, mechanical or electric, B, chemical or electric, C, nuclear or electric, or D, thermal or electric. Well, wait a minute. If a fuel pump is electric, how does it move fuel?
It's got a plug in it.
And the plug's what moves the fuel?
No. There's like vacuum.
We were talking a minute ago about carburetors. Listen to this. What if I took a bucket of water, fuel, whatever you want to call it, and I put water in it, and I stuck a hose in it, right here. This is a hose, and I took an air blower, rubber-tipped air blower, and I blew right here. What's going to happen?
Suck the water out of it.
Mm-hmm. How come?
Oh, you got to do it.
Well, you're going to have the pressure right here is going to be lower than the pressure pushing down. Got it? Where's the pressure pushing down coming from?
Water. Air.
Atmosphere. I know what you guys are laughing about. Guys, I was your age once too, okay, but I grew out of that nonsense.
I started
Okay.
to say that.
Got that? Okay. And you got this, you're going to have this coming out here. This is how a carburetor works. It's exactly how a carburetor works. Now, this doesn't happen instantaneously. So, imagine yourself doing this. Watch this. Watch what I'm going to do now. I'm going to loop this over like that. And I'm going to let the air that's coming in go past that. And I got throttle plate down here. That throttle plate's going to determine when the air comes in. You open the throttle plate, the air comes in, and what you wind up with is gas being drawn out of the reservoir past that throttle plate. Now they've got this little venturi, little round thing in there. It's got little holes around it, and it makes a mist that pulls that in there. The reason I'm going over this, you got fuel, you got engine performance. This is sort of a right line. Okay, because of the fact that this doesn't happen instantaneously, we've got to have another item hooked to the throttle linkage, and a pump that's got gas available to it that can squirt gas in there directly. As soon as you move the throttle, it squirts gas in there. If that accelerator pump's not working, it's going to stumble. Something else the accelerator pump does, when you first start it cold, it's going to squirt some gas in there and wet the manifold. And somebody was talking to me the other day about one that starts really hard when it's cold. The Bronco kind of does that because the injectors are dirty. And injectors get dirty, it'll cause it to start hard when it's cold. And you may, if you took some carburetor spray or something and squirted it just a little bit in there, which you're wetting the manifold, ordinarily the injectors double squirt when you're spinning it over, and that does the same job the accelerator pump does. All right. But you were talking about electric fuel pumps. Okay, if I've got an electric fuel pump, isn't there some mechanical element to an electric fuel pump?
Do what?
Isn't there some mechanical element to an electric fuel pump?
Yeah, something inside the pump.
Is the supercharger driven by exhaust gas?
Yeah.
Is it? What drives a supercharger? What's the difference between a supercharger and a turbocharger? The turbocharger is the one that's driven by the exhaust gas. The supercharger is driven by a belt.
So this is larger than the crankshaft.
It's actually driven by a belt off the pulley off the crank. These Park Avenue Ultra that we change the oil on every now and then has got a supercharger on it. And it's driven, got a belt sticking out the nose of it, and it spins these, rotors in that blower that pulls the air.
You ever had a vehicle with a supercharger on it?
Huh?
You ever had a vehicle with a supercharger on it?
Never owned one. I've worked on a bunch of them.
Have you ever worked on one that's been on my truck like mine?
Huh?
Have you ever worked on one that's been on a truck like mine?
No, not a supercharger. Well, in a Lightning, Ford Lightning supercharger. But on many types of engines, what measures the volume or quantity, the mass and the density of? Okay, how's it work? How does a mass airflow sensor work? What does it do? If I was going to connect, let's say I got a mass airflow sensor, a 4-wire mass airflow sensor. You know where those 4 wires go? This is a school. We're supposed to be learning this.
Computer to the computer, regulated by, it's hard to explain. I know. I don't think I explain.
If I was going to test one, like if I had just a mass airflow sensor and I had a connector that plugged into it that had just 4 wires dangling off of it, and I wanted to, it's still on the motor, right? I could crank the engine. How would I test that mass airflow sensor to see if it was doing what it was supposed to? Let's say that my scan tool is telling me it's not doing anything, and I don't want to just do the thing like they do at some shops and just slam a part on it and charge them for it. Oh, that didn't fix it. Let's put something else on it, charge them for that. Oh, that didn't fix it either. Let's put something else on it, charge them for that. Gosh, we must have a wire harness problem. Oh, look, here's a bad ground. Okay, buddy, it's going to be $685 for all the parts we put on, and then you don't tell them about the bad ground you fixed. Is that right, to do somebody that way? No, it's not. You're supposed to troubleshoot first before you start throwing parts at it. Throwing parts at it's easy for you, expensive for them, and it makes you look stupid if somebody else comes along and finds out what was really wrong. Tell you something else goes wrong. You happen to disturb what's causing the problem without actually fixing it, and all of this stuff you put on there seems like it fixed it because you didn't troubleshoot properly. Then it cuts up again down the road somewhere. You happen to pull into another shop and say, well, this is the whole thing that was wrong to start with. This was a bad ground. Right over here, see it dancing around loose. You know? See what I'm saying? That kind of thing happens, guys. It'll make you look like an idiot if you put all this stuff on somebody's car and somebody else finds something else is wrong with it. It was a little something you could fix without even buying a part. Remember that. Right here, what I'm talking about, you got 4 wires. You need to know about these 4 wires here. One of them is B+. One of them is B-, which is ground, just straight ground, straight power. One of them is a signal return to the computer. Basically, the computer would be like a voltmeter. So if you hook a voltmeter up between these other two, and you put power there, ground there, and you powered it up, you ought to see this mass airflow sensor putting something out. If your scan tool says 0, and you power and ground it, and you put your meter between these two, and it's reading like 0.8 of a volt at idle, and you give it gas, and it goes up as you give it gas, you know that mass airflow sensor is working. Now, it may not be exactly accurate. It may be reading a little lower than it should, causing your fuel trims to be off, but that's how you check a 4-wire mass airflow sensor. Now, some of them will have a couple more wires, and those other 2 wires will be measuring the temperature of the incoming air, which would be like main air temperature.
Supercharger uses synthetic oil on the inside of the unit.
Yeah, you're supposed to check it every 30,000 miles. There's a little plug there. It uses different oil than what's in the motor. All right, so crude oil is a what kind of energy resource?
Non-exhaustive.
Well, maybe not, but what is this stuff? This stuff I'm seeing from Valvoline, which is basically they're not using it for gasoline, but this stuff called Next Gen. What is that? It's in the green bottle, and on the bottle it says Next Gen. Right here. See where it says Next Gen?
Yeah.
On that thing right here.
Renewable.
Hmm?
Renewable.
That's all that's actually been used.
And like,
Yeah, it is renewable, but it's not basically an energy source. That oil right there is for lubrication. You can drain the oil and redo it.
yeah.
Right. What did you say?
Next generation oil.
Well, it's basically they're using it again. And
What do you call it?
there was a time when that oil that had been re-refined and rebottled was cheap because it was considered to be like, you know, oil that would be okay, but it was kind of like second-rate oil. And now Valvoline has taken it to a new level, and they've got it to where they're really making it to be good oil again.
Still got to take the plugs out, Bronco?
Huh? No, you got to finish doing that. But you left the key in it and the windows down when you left the other day. Thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Smart. So the key was pulled out and the windows were rolled up by a more responsible college student who didn't even have to be asked to do it. All right. What does it mean if fuel is very volatile?
Try to get Brandon to take
Does that mean it's expensive? Does that mean it's got great lubricating abilities? Does that mean it does not ignite easily, or does that mean it does ignite easily? What does volatile mean?
It ignites easily.
It ignites easily. But let me ask you this. Oh, here's another little caveat. I'll give you the answer to your question. But what is the difference between premium fuel and regular fuel?
Well, I don't know.
No. Ethanol is not what makes the difference between premium and regular.
Well, the high grade.
Okay, so what does that mean exactly?
Better filter.
What are you seeing on the pump? What's those numbers you see on the pump?
80.
87,
Yeah,
91, 93. What is that number in reference to? Come on, guys. Don't play dumb with me. Octane, okay? Okay, so what's the difference between an 87 octane fuel and a 93 octane fuel?
Hey, it costs more.
Huh?
Costs more.
They cost more.
It's got more octane in it.
Yeah.
Keep your motor clean.
Yeah.
Does it?
I put
You
you.
sure? 93 does, 87 don't.
Okay, then why is it that Chrysler and Ford have both got technical service bulletins out that says if you use this where this is supposed to go, you're going to make a mess?
Because it calls for that. It said that.
It burns slower. And since this burns slower, if it's set up to run this, all of this don't burn. And what does it do? It leaves cruddy black stuff inside the combustion chamber that starts to build up and make carbon. So what they're saying in their bulletins is if you run 87 octane, I'm sorry, if you run 93, which is supposed to be running 87, you're going to start carboning up the inside of your combustion chamber.
Can't you get 93 at the gas pump?
You can.
That's
It's
what
more
I got down
expensive.
there one time. I put it forward.
Yeah.
I got $10 worth. You know how many gallons you give me?
I mean,
Two.
yep. Yeah. Yeah. Two. Well, you should have looked at which button you was pushing at the gas pump. What I'm saying is, this is good for engines that are built for it, like your supercharged high-performance engines are supposed to have this. But the ones that are set up to run on 87 octane, you're not supposed to burn that, okay? The 91 octane, the mid-grade. See, you're not really doing yourself any favors going up like that. You get where I'm going?
I think it costs more.
All right, now remember this. This burns slower. Now what happens when gas gets rotten? You remember the Escort wouldn't start? Okay, the Escort, remember the gas was just stinking really bad? Okay, so if we had measured the octane on that, and there's a way that you can do that, if we'd have measured the octane, what would the octane would have measured on that?
0.
Well, it would have gone down probably into the low 80s. What does that mean? It means it's more explosive.
So if it stinks, it's more explosive.
The lower that number is, the more explosive it gets. The higher the number is, the less explosive it gets. Here's something else. This guy that I worked with out there at the Ford place one time pulled a Bronco, just like this blue one we got, except it was maybe a year or two newer. He had it in his service bay, and he was working on it. And when he fired that thing up when it was cold, it would go poop, poop, poop. It would pop back and cut up and wouldn't work, run right. And he worked and worked and worked. He cleaned the injectors. He did all kinds of stuff. He was checking the ignition time. Everything he could come up with, he was checking all the, computer sensors. Nothing would do anything to touch that problem. And I was watching him from a distance and thinking about that thing. And I went over there and I said, go out there to the people that own it, because they were waiting on it. He'd been working on it all morning trying to figure out what was wrong with it. And I said, talk to those people and don't ask them any leading questions other than what gas are you using? What kind of gas are you using in this? And I bet you, if you go out there, you're going to find out they're running 93 octane. And it's set up to run on it. So they go out there, and he asked the people, and they say, oh, we're burning 93 octane, best we can get. Well, he got the 93 octane out of there, and he put some 87 octane in it, and it ran perfect. All he had to do was go down a couple of grades with his gas to get that problem taken care of. Why is that? That's because this burns slower. And it was set up to burn this, and they had it burning that. So if you go too far this way, you're going to have a problem. If you go too far the other way, which was what the rotten gas was, it wouldn't even start. You can go to a lawnmower that's been sitting up all winter. If it's got rotten gas in it, boom, 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 you won't get it started. Pull it until your tongue hangs out like a tie. You still ain't going to get it started. You dump that gas out of there, put fresh gas in it, first time you pull the cord, you fire it up. I'm telling you, the gas is really important. That's why a lot of your shop manual procedures will say, take a fuel sample. Okay? That's something that I'm trying to burn in over there. A lot of people just have that, it don't matter as long as it's gasoline, just throw it in there and be all right. Well, it's really important that it be right. If it's got a lot of alcohol in it, you got a couple of problems there. It's not going to run right with that in there too. One time, there was and this is for engine performance purposes, I'm telling you this too. I had a situation where there was Ford Taurus. It was an 89 model that came in there that before we even got an 89 Ford Taurus. This silly thing wouldn't run. And it would, well, I say it wouldn't run. It would run really, really bad when it was cold. But if I kept playing with it and I feathered the gas, I could keep it alive. Now, this is interesting, so listen to what I'm telling you. All right, so when I drove the car, there was two things I noticed about it after I finally got it warm enough to run. And I found out when I was there checking all of my stuff that the computer was doing everything it could to keep that car alive. And finally, whenever I'd get it where it was warm enough to run, I drove it, and it labor knocked a little bit, and it would absolutely fly. It would run stronger than any Taurus like that I had ever driven. And it was just a plain old 3-liter Vulcan engine, just like you see in this Sable out here. So I was talking to one of the Ford service reps that came by. Me and the shop foreman were talking about this car because it was a brand new car. Came from the rental place. It only had 1,800 miles on it. And so I was talking to the guy from Ford. His name was Stuart Sonnen, and I said, told him everything that was going on with it. And I also told him that if you ever don't keep it alive and let it die a few times, it'll start making the spark plugs get real dirty, and then you'd have to take them and either replace them or clean them before it even tries to start again. So he says, check the compression. So I pulled the spark plugs out, and I checked the compression, and ordinarily the compression on a Taurus like that one, even brand new, would run about 160 psi per cylinder. This one was running 210 on every cylinder, even, right across the board. Okay, so I told the guy from Ford that, I go, oh, I don't know what's going on there. He said, higher compression, you know, I mean, sometimes if you got valve timing that's advanced a little bit, it'll make the compression higher, right? All right, so I told the shop foreman to start with, didn't think it had anything to do with it. I said, listen, it's labor knocking, pick up your head, Brett. Don't go to sleep. All right, right here, we got, and I says, I notice also it's smoking a little bit when it idles. And it doesn't run worth a crap when it's cold and all this. See, it's up to me to fix this. I really didn't have anybody to ask. You know, I had people going on. So the long and the short of it was somebody had rented that car. You know, if you ever rent a car, you have to fill it up with fuel before you take it back. If they have to fill it up with fuel, they charge you about $6 a gallon for every gallon they have to put in it. So it's in your best interest to fill a rental car up with gas before you take it back.
What if it ain't full when you get it?
Huh?
What if it ain't full when you get it?
You don't rent it. You reject the car. You say, that ain't full of gas, I'm not taking it. Every single one of the cars is going to be full of gas when you rent it. It is. It's just the way they set it up. All right, so you're looking for a loophole, ain't you? All right, so right here, what we had, some yo-yo, when he put gas in that car, had put about 4 or 5 gallons of diesel fuel in it.
That's right.
Now, why did that raise the compression? You got any idea? I mean, why was the compression higher because of the diesel fuel?
Because it don't burn it.
Well, it's like whenever you're doing a compression test on one, if you actually have low compression on one cylinder, let's say you got 175 on all the cylinders, one of them got 100, and you want to know, wow, that's a big difference. I don't know why this one got 100. Is it rings? Is it valves? I'm going to squirt some oil in there, spin it over, let that oil get around those rings, help them seal. And if that raises the compression, I know the rings are bad. See what I'm saying? If it doesn't raise the compression, you either got a little hole in your piston or you got valves that are not seating. You get what I'm saying?
I'm about as dumb as my neighbor one time.
Yeah. Well,
Left your gas can out in the rain.
yeah, that's not a good plan either.
Fill it up full of water.
And then
Water this lawnmower.
yeah, that'll do it. That's standard procedure. People do that a lot. Okay, this is what I was getting at. He actually went past 93 octane when he put that in there. But did you notice what I was talking about before? His thing would really scream as far as when it pinged a little bit because of that higher compression. And the higher compression also made it run better, giving it a stronger running engine. But it was not compatible with the car because it would foul the plugs if you tried to start it. Anyway, it was a little fuel quality story. It was actually less volatile, but it was causing the engine to have some more strength. They actually, incidentally, you guys, they also put lubricant in fuel now that they didn't used to because the electric fuel pumps will wear out if you don't have a little bit of lubricant in the fuel. What's the name of the technology that uses the engine control system to shut off the air-fuel mixture to some of the engine cylinders when all the cylinders are not needed?
Cylinder deactivation.
Yeah, and how do they do that? What car do you know of that does that?
2011 Chevrolet.
Yeah.
How do they do it?
They run off 6 instead of 8.
I understand that, but I mean, that's on the mechanical level, how do they do it? What do they do?
How many internal wheels does it?
They stop opening the valves. They trap some exhaust in there, so it'll be squeezing that air, but they stop opening the valves, and you got some cylinders that are just squeezing air. Now on these Ford engines, these Triton engines that you see, they got cylinder head temperature sensors, and they'll shut off some of the cylinders and just use them to pump air if the engine's trying to overheat. So that's what that is.
Wheels does
Huh?
turbocharger have?
What?
How many internal wheels
How many internal wheels does the turbocharger have? Well, if exhaust drives it, it would have to have one in the exhaust and one in the intake, right? All right. Okay. Now then, ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel contains ultra-low sulfur diesel contains a maximum of how many parts per million of sulfur?
B.
That's going to be A. 15 parts per million of sulfur. Remember that number. Can you tell me anything about how, like you use octane to rate gasoline, what do we use to rate diesel? I mean, there's different ratings of diesel fuel too.
on-road?
What about cetane? How do you know if a vehicle's got off-road diesel in it?
Smell it different,
Huh?
Smell it different.
Well, it's got a different color too.
Green?
Yeah,
They
it'll
run all the way
either
to
be,
the gas tank, can't they?
well, if you can get to the fuel filter.
I mean, that stuff makes vehicles run better, don't it?
Not really. What it is, it's untaxed, and it has more crud in it that on-road diesel doesn't have. It doesn't have to meet the emission requirements that on-road diesel does, and on some of your electronic diesels, it'll actually clog up the injector. It's not good for it. When I was working on Power Stroke diesels, and I took the top off the fuel filter housing, and I saw red or blue diesel fuel in there, I put it back on and park it outside, and I say, run 2 or 3 gas tanks full of real diesel through it before I won't do anything to it. Because it would be running crappy because they have gel building up on the injectors and all that. Sometimes you have to replace the injectors if you got bad enough. But it's not good for these newer, the ones that are made to have lower emissions and all
I mean,
that.
like, why can you run it in your tractor, but you can't run it in your vehicle?
Because the tractor don't have to meet the same emission requirements the vehicle does.
I mean, like,
And
you get a
listen to
cheap-
this, it's not taxed. It's cheaper because there's no tax on it, or there's fewer taxes on it.
It ain't cheap.
Yeah. Well, that's why a lot of people run it. That's why a lot of people used to run it. It ain't because it's better. Yeah.
Huh?
What do you have to pay on your on-road diesel? You got to pay road use taxes. You know, part of the taxes that you're using, that you're paying on diesel, helps to fix the roads. If the tractor don't drive on the road except to go from one field to the other,
But,
typically you don't do
I
that.
was at a American store yesterday, and there's this guy asking me, did he have any off-road diesel? And she said, yeah. He said, how much is it? She said, $4.89.
Yep. That's probably, I don't know, that's what she's.
Tractors shouldn't have a heart attack.
Well, I tell you something else too. If she's selling off-road diesel to somebody to go in their vehicle to get on the road, she's gonna get busted for it probably. You know, but anyway, you don't ever know. He could have been a G-man. You know.
Now, the way you do it, and you fill up them tanks in the back of your truck, then pour it in your truck, and every time you run out of gas,
Yeah.
you're out of fuel.
Yeah. Well, it sounds good till you have to go work on it because you did that. And I used to see those. We used to have ambulances that they would run that because it was cheaper, and it would always cause trouble. I mean, they'd always have to come in there, they'd bucking and jumping and surging and all that kind of stuff. And if they were running regular diesel fuel, they'd have trouble. The cetane cetane's a colorless fluid. It's got perfect combustion qualities, and it's rated at 100. And a good diesel fuel, like 40, is what you're supposed to be rated at. But in other words, they compare it to cetane. Technician A says gasoline is more volatile than diesel. Technician B says the distillation is the process used to refine crude oil. Who's right about that?
Oh, yeah.
What does crude oil look like when it comes out of the ground?
Black.
What if it's really, really good crude oil coming out of the ground? If you put it in a mason jar, you wouldn't never know it was crude oil because it's a green color and you can see through it real clear. You know, you always see the gusher squirting black oil up out of the ground, you know, whenever you're looking at it, but
Really dark green.
the real good oil is a green color, yeah, and it's that's what my dad was talking about. He used to work in an oil patch. And he's the real good oil that they get out of the ground. It's light, sweet, crude stuff, I guess they
How
call
did
it.
they get that?
They pump it out of the ground with a
That's
well.
stupid.
Yeah.
I don't remember the hillbillies, you shoot something and
Yeah.
oh, God.
All right, so that's that number 8 is C. Technician A says the higher the octane number of gasoline, the more it resists detonation. Technician B says 93 octane is required for most cars. Well, you know good and well that 93 octane is not required for most cars. Technician A is the one that's right there. We were talking about that. The more it resists detonation, didn't I tell you it burns slower? Some people claim it burns the exhaust system out on your car because it burns hotter too. Technician A says an example of an example oxygenate is sulfur. I think like a badly worded question there. Technician B says lead is used today in the United States to oxygenate fuel. Neither one of those guys are right. Why did they used to put lead in gasoline? You know how on these old gas pumps it'll say it contains lead? One of the reasons was it coated the valves and kept them from beating themselves into the cylinder head and wearing out the valve seats. It kind of lubricated the internal parts of the engine and helped it last longer. But they got that lead out of there. Why did they take the lead out? You guys need to know that.
It will kill you.
Well, it will kill you, but so will a lot of other things. They did that because it will kill the catalytic converter. Catalytic converter strata would get coated with lead and it ruined it. And it would actually get more car wouldn't hardly run. Oh, incidentally, that question I asked you that you never could remember to ask the man over there, the catalytic converter was stopped up on that car. That's why when you pull 3 of the spark plugs out of it, it would crank and run. It wouldn't even start until you pull 3 of the plugs out and then it would start and run. And that's what was going on with that car. I figured I'd give you the answer to that. Okay, Technician A says diesel engines are only used in large trucks. Haha, that's funny. Technician B says diesel fuel has more energy per volume than gasoline. And he's right. More energy per volume. Remember what I was telling you about these gasoline engines? All the fire on a gasoline engine typically goes out before about 25 degrees after top dead center. On a diesel fuel, it's burning all the way down. So the diesel fuel is like pumping the crank really hard to make it go. That's why it's got all that torque. The gas engine's just slapping it. All right. Now then, last one. Technician A says one way to increase fuel economy is make sure your tires are properly inflated. When you do a tune-up on somebody's car, if you go ahead and check their tire pressure and it's low on air, a lot of times they'll say, wow, this runs great, after you get through with it because they've been driving around half flat tires. Technician B says one way to increase fuel economy is to avoid excessive idling. Who's right about that? Well, C is too. On some of these GM cars, they got a great big old thing. It's like a starter alternator with a big belt hooked to the front of the engine. And when you stop, the engine stalls. And when you go to give it the gas, it starts back up automatically. It's like a golf cart, sort of. And that stops it from excessive idling.